She didn't move. That was the part they would all remember afterward. Not the sound of the seam splitting. Not the gasp from the far end of the table. Not Valentina Greco Fabri's hand still fisted in the collar of the uniform she had just destroyed in front of 43 dinner guests. What they would remember was Daria Farini standing exactly where she had been standing, with the serving tray level in both hands and the wine still upright in the glasses, and her face the same as it had been a moment before, attentive, composed, revealing nothing. She didn't move because there was a tray in her hands and the glasses were full. She didn't move because 7 members of her staff were in this room and she was the head of housekeeping and they were watching her. She didn't move because she had been not moving through difficult things for long enough that it had become simply what she did. And she didn't move because Enzo Ricci, seated 12 places down the table on the left-hand side, had been watching her for 7 months, and in that moment the seam split from her shoulder to the middle of her back. The room gone silent. Valentina's hand finally releasing, he made a decision about her. The kind of decision that, once made, does not unmake itself. What Daria didn't know, standing in the wreckage of her uniform with her tray level and her face composed, was that by the time she reached the kitchen door, Enzo Ricci had already taken out his phone. Not to call anyone, to look something up. What he found would take Valentina Greco Fabri approximately 11 days to fully understand. Via Serrata sat on a hillside in the Chianti that had belonged to the Greco family for 200 years, which everyone who worked there knew, because Valentina mentioned it. On average, 4 times per day. The gates closed at 10 p.m. The gates opened at 7 a.m. Between those hours, the 31 people who lived and worked on the estate were inside it, which Valentina described as a security measure and which the staff called, quietly and only among themselves, the lock. Daria had been head of housekeeping for 3 years. She had been at the villa for 5. Starting as a junior housemaid at 24 when her mother's diagnosis had made it necessary to find work that came with accommodation, because accommodation meant she could redirect everything she earned to the memory care facility in Fiesole, where her mother lived in a room with a view of the hills she had always loved. The facility cost €3,400 a month. Daria earned $2,200. Her cousin Stefano had agreed 3 years ago to cover the difference from a family account that had since been restructured, which meant his name was on the payment authorization and his access to the account was now technically administrative rather than funded, which meant the arrangement worked only if no one examined it, and Valentina had been examining it for 6 weeks. Daria knew this because Valentina had told her. Not directly. Directly was not Valentina's way. Valentina had mentioned it in the margins of a conversation about flower arrangements, the specific tone of someone placing an object on a table to see if the other person would look at it. Such complicated paperwork, household finances, she had said, examining a vase of dahlias that Daria had arranged that morning. I do hope everything at your mother's facility is properly documented. These care arrangements can become so difficult when the names on the authorizations don't match the intentions, Daria had said. The dahlias are garden-grown. I can source hothouse if you prefer. Valentina had looked at her. And in the look was the message, I know what I have. I'm letting you know I know. Daria had gone back to the arrangements and understood, with the clarity of someone who has been holding things together for a long time and has learned to assess weight accurately, that the situation had entered a different phase. She had not yet known what to do about it. The dinner was a quarterly affair. 43 guests from Florence and Siena and Rome, business associates and old family connections, and the specific category of person who attends events at villas and the Chianti, because the villas exist, and they have been invited, and it would not occur to them to decline. Daria had run the service at every quarterly dinner for 3 years. She knew all 43 place settings, the dietary requirements of 21 guests, the wines, the order of courses, and which guests needed to be kept conversationally separated from which other guests by a minimum of 2 seats. She also knew from the seating chart that Enzo Ricci was attending for the first time. She knew his name because it was on the chart. She knew nothing else about him, which she considered normal. She knew the names of all the guests and nothing else about most of them, because knowing names was her job, and knowing more than names was not. She had noted him on arrival, the way she noted every guest, presence, bearing, any specific requirements communicated by the household office in advance. His requirement had been simple: no shellfish. He had arrived at 7:45 in a dark jacket and no tie, and had done something she noticed because it was unusual. He had thanked the member of staff who took his coat. Not performatively, as an acknowledgement between one person and another. She had filed it and moved on. The incident happened at 9:17, between the secondo and the dolce, when Daria was serving from the left side of the table and one of the guests addressed her by her first name, which she had given him. He had asked. She saw no reason to withhold it. And Valentina, at the head of the table, had said across 23 place settings and 43 guests, and the kind of silence that drops when a hostess uses a particular tone. You'll address the staff as Signorina, please. Daria, you know better than to encourage informality. Daria had said, my apologies, Contessa, and Valentina had said, I didn't hear Contessa. When you address me, I expect the correct form. This is your 4th reminder. Daria had said, my apologies, Contessa, the same words, the same tone. Not capitulation, precision. And Valentina had stood, a movement so abrupt that the guest to her left reached for his water glass out of reflex, and crossed 12 feet of dining room in the specific manner of a woman who has decided the situation requires a physical demonstration, and she had taken hold of Daria's collar with her right hand, and she had pulled. The seam split from the shoulder to the middle of Daria's back. 43 guests. Daria held the tray level. The wine stayed in the glasses. She did not move. Valentina released the collar and said, in a voice returned to social register, when I require a demonstration of the correct form of address, I will have one. You may continue serving. Daria said, yes, Contessa. She continued serving. She served the remaining 8 guests on the left side. She returned to the kitchen. She set the tray down. She stood at the sink with her back to the kitchen staff and breathed for 10 seconds, not to compose herself. She was already composed, but because 10 seconds at the sink was a thing she had always done when the space behind her ribs became briefly too small. And then she turned around and directed the next course. One of the junior staff, a young woman named Giulia, who was 19 and had been at the villa for 3 months, was looking at her with an expression Daria recognized. The specific, helpless distress of someone who has watched an injustice and doesn't know what it's asking of them. The panna cotta for table positions 1 through 7 needs to go in the next 4 minutes, Daria said. The raspberry coulis on the side for position 3, he doesn't like it on top. Giulia said, Daria. 4 minutes, Daria said. Giulia went. Daria went to the linen cupboard and found a cardigan, which was not regulation but which covered what needed covering, and she put it on and went back to the dining room and finished the service. She found the note under the door of the housekeeping office at 11:15, after the guests had departed and the staff had finished the clear-up, and Daria had done the final walk-through of the dining room the way she always did, checking placement and surfaces and the specific inventory of things that could go missing at dinner parties and go unnoticed until morning. The note was on the back of a business card. 5 words. in handwriting that was small and even and applied with more pressure than necessary, as though the writer was accustomed to writing on surfaces less cooperative than cardstock. Don't do anything until Tuesday. On the front of the card, a name, a phone number, nothing else. She turned it over twice. She put it in the pocket of the cardigan. She went to her room, which was on the 3rd floor of the east wing, and had a window that faced the valley and the lights of Florence in the far distance, and she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the card for a while. Then she put it on the nightstand, and she lay down, and she slept. Sunday was a full day, and Monday was a full day, and she did not allow herself to think about the card for either of them. Because there was work, and because thinking about it wouldn't change what Tuesday was. And because she had a policy about not spending energy on things that weren't yet actionable. On Monday evening, Valentina called her into the study. The study at Via Serrato was the room Daria liked least in the house, not for what it was, but for what it was used for, which was the management of the staff in the specific way Valentina managed them. Which was to say, with the file open on the desk so the person across from it could see it but not read it. Daria's file was open on the desk. "Sit," Valentina said. Daria sat. "I've been reviewing the staff's personal documentation," Valentina said, in the tone of someone performing a routine administrative task. "I have some questions about the payment authorization for your mother's care facility." "Of course," Daria said. "I'm happy to provide any documentation you need." "The name on the authorization is Stefano Farini." "My cousin." "Yes, and his relationship to the account?" "He's a signatory on a family account," Daria said. "The arrangement was established 3 years ago when my mother's care needs changed." "And the funding source?" "The family account," Daria said. "Which I contribute to from my salary, as does my cousin from his income. And if that arrangement were to be examined by the facility's compliance team, they would find a payment authorization signed by an account holder," Daria said. "Which is what it is." Valentina looked at her, the smile that was not warm. "These facilities have very specific requirements about the source of funds for care arrangements. Any irregularity, even the appearance of one, can trigger a review." She paused. "A review that might result in a temporary suspension of care while the investigation is completed." The room was very quiet. "My mother has advanced memory impairment," Daria said. "A temporary suspension of care would not be a temporary disruption for her. It would be a permanent one." "I understand that," Valentina said. "Which is why I'm raising it with you privately, rather than reporting it," Daria said. The word reporting landed in the room with its actual weight. "I want the household to run correctly," Valentina said. "I want staff who understand their position, and I want to know that the people working in my home are grateful for what they have here." The room was quiet. "I understand," Daria said. "Good," Valentina said. "That's all." Daria stood. She walked to the door. "Daria," Valentina said. She stopped. "Saturday's incident," Valentina said. "I trust we understand each other on that as well." "Yes, Contessa," Daria said. She walked out of the study. She walked up 3 flights of stairs to the east wing. She went to her room, and she picked up the card from the nightstand, and she read both sides again. "Don't do anything until Tuesday." She put it back down. She stood at the window that faced the valley and the far lights of Florence, and she breathed the 10 seconds at the window the same way she breathed them at the kitchen sink. And then she made a decision that she understood, already made on Saturday night. She was going to trust a piece of cardstock from a man she didn't know. Not because she had reason to, because she had nothing else. And because a man who had watched her hold a tray level with her uniform in pieces and had written 5 words that meant I see what's happening, and I'm asking you to wait. That man had been precise about something, and she had a habit of noticing precision. Tuesday came in the way of Tuesdays in May in the Chianti, slow and gold and smelling of something that was not quite lavender and not quite rosemary, but had elements of both. And the hills were the color they went in late spring, when the vines had leafed out, and the light was at the angle that made everything look as though it had been painted by someone who had a personal investment in the subject. Daria was in the garden at 7:15, overseeing the cutting of the fresh flowers for the week's arrangements, when the cars arrived. Not one car. 4. Through the main gate, which was open because it was after 7, at 7:47, moving at the pace of vehicles that have been expected, rather than vehicles that have arrived unexpectedly. The first car stopped at the front entrance. Enzo Ricci got out. He was in a dark jacket again and again, no tie, and he looked the way he had looked at the dinner, unhurried, completely oriented, a man who knows where he is and why he is there, and has already considered what will happen next. He looked at the garden and found her with the specific directness of someone who has not been guessing. He said, "Good morning. I'm sorry for the early hour." She said, "You're exactly on time." Which was true. It was 7:47, and she had understood from until Tuesday that Tuesday morning was the moment, and she had been outside in the garden since 7:15, in case early was how it went. He looked at her for a moment, with the amber-gray eyes that she had noticed at the dinner from 12 places down and had filed away and not retrieved since. "Come inside with me," he said. Please, what happened in the following 3 hours, Daria would later describe to Julia, who was the only member of staff she told, and only because Julia had been there for the relevant portion of it and deserved an explanation as administration. What it was, more precisely, Enzo Ricci and 2 people who worked for him. A man and a woman with the careful efficiency of people who understand that precision is a form of kindness, met with Valentina Greco Fabri in the villa's main salon. Daria was not in the meeting. She was in the garden for the first 40 minutes, and then in the kitchen, and then after Giulia came to find her with an expression that required explanation, in the East Wing corridor outside her own room. She learned what had happened in sequence. The first thing, Enzo Ricci was the primary investor in the Greco family's principal business interests. He had been, for 11 years, the financial infrastructure behind the commercial portfolio that sustained Via Serrata and its associated properties. He had exercised, as of Tuesday morning, a contractual right that the documentation, and the documentation she would later learn was meticulous, had always contained and had never before been invoked. The right of management review. The second thing, the review had found, documented and presented in the meeting, a series of practices regarding staff management that constituted, under the terms of the investment agreement, a material breach. Specifically, the use of personal information about employees to coerce professional conduct, the application of financial threat against a staff member's medical care arrangement for a dependent family member, the deliberate public humiliation of a senior staff member in front of 43 guests, documented, witnessed, time-stamped. The third thing, Valentina's co-ownership of the estate included a buyout clause. The clause had been activated. The process would take 90 days and was not contestable under the terms she had signed. The fourth thing, and this was the one Julia reported with widened eyes, having overheard it from the corridor outside the salon where she had no professional reason to be, was that Enzo Ricci had said, very quietly, near the end of the meeting, "You put your hand on her uniform in front of 43 people. You will not be in a position to do that again." Not a threat, a statement of future fact. She found him on the terrace at 11:30, He was standing at the low wall, looking at the valley, which was doing what the Chianti Valley does in late May, existing beautifully, without effort, as though beauty were simply its default condition and anything else would require explanation. She stood beside him and looked at the valley too. "You were watching from the dinner," she said. "For 7 months," he said. "Before the dinner." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "I watch the people who run things," he said. "Not the people who own them, the people who know where the coolies goes, and which guests need 2 seats of separation, and how to hold a tray level when something is happening that would make most people put the tray down." She said nothing. "I've been in rooms with a great deal of power for a long time," he said. "The people who interest me are the ones who are precise when it costs them something to be precise." He looked at her. "You said yes, Contessa, twice in 43 seconds. Same words, same tone. You weren't capitulating. You were refusing to give her anything different." "The tray was full," she said. "I know," he said. "That was the first thing I noticed. That you didn't put it down." A pause. "Most people would have put it down. The glasses were full." "Yes," he said. "And that mattered to you more than what was happening to you. Which is either," he said, with a slight movement at the corner of his mouth, "extraordinary professionalism or extraordinary stubbornness, and I find I don't mind which." Daria looked at the valley. "The payment authorization," she said. "My mother's arrangement is documented correctly as of this morning," he said. "The facility's compliance team received confirmation from the Family Accounts Bank of the legitimate standing of the authorization. There is nothing to investigate." He paused. "There will not be." She looked at him. "How?" she said. "Because it was always legitimate," he said. "It only required someone to provide the bank documentation that confirmed it was legitimate, which your cousin's solicitor has now provided." Another pause. "I called your cousin Sunday morning. He was helpful." She looked back at the valley. Her hands, which she had been holding at her sides, were steady. They were always steady. It was possible that this was the first time she had noticed them being steady, and felt something about it other than simply, "Good, they're steady." "I don't know what to do with this," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it," he said. "It's done. You've done a significant thing for someone you don't know." "I know you," he said. "I have known you for 7 months. I know you arrive in the garden at 7:15 when the cutting needs oversight. I know you do a final walk of the dining room after every event, and that you have a running inventory in your head of every item that could go missing. I know you have a policy about not spending energy on things that aren't yet actionable, because you have been not spending energy on Valentina for a long time, and it was visible to anyone paying attention as a deliberate conservation." He looked at her steadily. "I know your mother is in Fiesole. I know what the hills look like from her window, because I asked about the facility before I came here this morning, and the administrator described the view." Daria was very still. "Why did you ask about the view?" she said. "Because it seemed important to you," he said. "That she has the view she loves. You've arranged your entire life around that room and that window, and I wanted to understand what it was you were protecting." She looked at him for a long moment. "The hills from her window," she said. "She doesn't always know what they are anymore, where she is, what year it is." She paused. "But she knows the light. In the morning, when it comes through, she always turns toward it." "Yes," he said. "Quietly, she was a painter," Daria said. "Before, I know," he said. "The administrator mentioned it." A pause, and in it the texture she was learning to recognize, not grief exactly, but the weight of things that deserve acknowledgement. She said your mother still asks for the window to be left uncovered. Even on cold days. Even on cold days, Daria confirmed. The valley was very bright in the late morning. Below them, the vines ran in their rows down the hill, and the light was at the exact angle her mother had loved, coming from the east and just beginning to move toward noon. The hour she had called the honest light because it didn't flatter. It simply showed. The estate, Daria said. The 90 days. The buyout will be completed in 90 days, he said. During that period, the operational management will continue as it is. After that period, the management will be reviewed. He paused. I would like to discuss what that looks like with the head of housekeeping when she's ready to have that conversation. Daria looked at the estate, the garden she had designed 3 years ago from the existing structure, the lavender border that had been her idea, the cutting beds that produced everything the house used from March through October. She's ready to have it now, she said. He turned toward her slightly. Now, I have a policy about not deferring actionable conversations, she said. The corner of his mouth, more than usual, not quite a smile, but in the same neighborhood, and she was beginning to understand it was as close as he came in daylight on a terrace, which was, she found, enough. The position, he said, would be estate director, not housekeeping. The full operational management of the property, staff, grounds, the facility calendar, the accounts. He paused. It would require a different contract, a different title, and a salary that is not 2,200 euros a month. She looked at him. What is it? She said. He told her. She looked at the valley. That's more than the facility costs, she said. Yes, he said. With enough remaining that the conservation of energy becomes, eventually, less necessary. She stood with that for a moment, the specific sensation of a weight she had been carrying for so long that she had stopped noticing it as weight, and the first suggestion that it might, at some point, be set down. I'll need the full contract, she said. Of course. And 2 weeks to review it. Take whatever you need. And a conversation with the remaining staff before anything is announced, she said. They've been here through this, and they deserve to hear what's changing from me, not from a document. He looked at her with the expression she had been cataloging for the past 4 hours, the specific quality of a man who is encountering something he was hoping for and is precise enough to recognize it when it arrives. Agreed, he said. And Julia, she said. The junior housemaid. She's 19 and she's exceptional, and I want her contract extended before anything else changes. Done. Before I've signed anything. Done, he said again, not impatient. Certain, the tone of someone for whom the word means what it says. She looked at the garden below the terrace. The lavender border. The cutting beds, the rows of vines below them going down to the valley where the light was at the honest angle, the angle that showed things as they were. You wrote 5 words, she said, on a business card. Yes, you could have written more. You didn't need more, he said. You needed 5 words and enough time to decide whether you were going to trust them. And if I hadn't, then I would have done what I did Tuesday morning anyway, he said, and found a different way to have this conversation. He paused. But I thought you would. Why? Because you read the room at every dinner you run, he said. You read it for what it actually is, not what people are presenting. You had read the situation with Valentina accurately for months. You would read 5 words on a card the same way, for what they actually said, rather than for what it would be easiest to assume. Daria was quiet. What did they say? He said. The 5 words. What did you read them as? She thought about standing at her window at 11:15 on a Saturday night with the card in her hand and the lights of Florence in the far distance. Someone saw it happen, she said, and they're angry about it. And they have a plan. Yes, Enzo Ricci said. And they thought I could wait. I knew you could wait, he said. The question was whether you would believe I was worth waiting for. She looked at him. He looked at her. Below the terrace, the valley was brilliant in the midday light, and the estate was quiet in the way it was quiet when something that had been held tightly for a long time had finally, carefully, been put down. Give me the contract this week, she said. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. Daria Farini had learned to carry things without announcing them. Her mother's illness, her cousin's complicated good intentions, 31 people's working lives inside a set of gates that closed at 10 and opened at 7, and were controlled by a woman who understood power as a thing to be hoarded rather than used. She had held the tray level. She had said yes, Contessa, twice in 43 seconds. Same words, same tone, and given nothing extra. Because she had understood even in that moment that what Valentina wanted was a reaction, and what she was going to receive instead was precision. She knew what she was long before a man 12 places down the table did. She had always known. The question was simply whether the knowing was enough to keep going on, and most days it was. And some days the 10 seconds at the sink were longer than others, and she had kept going anyway. He had seen that. For 7 months, through a series of quarterly dinners and one catastrophic Saturday night, he had seen exactly what she was, and had decided, with the specific care of a man who does not decide things carelessly, that it was worth the drive up the Chianti Hill on a Tuesday morning to make sure she knew it. She signed the contract on a Friday. She told the staff on a Saturday morning, in the kitchen, with coffee, and Julia cried slightly, and then was embarrassed about it, and Daria handed her a cloth and said, "Your contract extension is effective Monday. Don't cry on the linens." Julia laughed through the crying, which was the correct response. That evening, for the first time in 3 years, Daria drove to the facility in Fiesole without calculating whether she could afford the petrol. She sat with her mother in the room that faced the hills. The light was going golden over the valley, the evening light, which her mother had always called the kind light, because it was less honest than the morning but more forgiving. Her mother turned toward it. She didn't know what year it was. She didn't know the name of the facility, or the name of the village, or tonight, the name of the woman sitting beside her. But she turned toward the light, the way she always had, the way she always would. Daria took her hand. Outside, the Chianti Hills went gold, then amber, then the deep blue that comes just before dark, and the lights of Florence appeared in the distance one by one, and the window stayed uncovered, the way her mother had asked, even on cold days. Especially on cold days. The first quarterly dinner under the new management of Via Serrata had 47 guests. Daria ran the service. Every course arrived on time. The coulis was on the side for position 3. Enzo Ricci was seated at the head of the table. He thanked the member of staff who brought his jacket at the end of the evening, as he always did. Tell me in the comments, was it when she held the tray level, or when she said she wanted Julia's contract extended before she'd signed anything herself? When did you know exactly who Daria was? If you come here for the ones who hold the tray level no matter what's happening, follow along. New story every day. One more thing. Valentina Greco Fabri left the villa on the 43rd day of the 90-day period. She did not say goodbye to the staff. She left a note for Daria, 3 words, which Daria read once and then used to level a slightly uneven leg on the kitchen table. The kitchen table has not wobbled since. That note, and what Daria did with it, is next.